Hello everyone. So this week and next, we're going to talk about Pythagoras of Samos. And whether or not you'd heard of any of the other philosophers that we have discussed so far in the course and the ones that we would be discussing, you would have most certainly heard of Pythagoras. Because we all did something called the Pythagorean theorem in school. And so this already must give you an idea of the kind of philosophy that this person called Pythagoras is credited with, which has something to do with mathematics. As we'll see, this is one part of it, and it's the major part of it, but what the Pythagoras and the Pythagoreans understand by mathematics may not be precisely what we in our modern times understand by mathematics. Now, I have news to tell you which you may like or may not, because this one philosopher that you did know of, and you might have been proud about it, there is a lot of controversy whether he actually existed or not. So Pythagoras is such a legendary figure, a proper legendary figure, and we'll see why, that there is a lot of doxographical tradition in which he is supposed to be this quasi-mythical figure. And so modern scholarship has been debating quite a lot about whether such a person existed at all, or whether he at least existed as a philosopher. I mean, he might have existed as a person, but might have just been some kind of a guru or shaman, and might not have existed as a philosopher. But what we will do is we will continue with the assumption that somebody called Pythagoras did exist, that he was born in around 570 BC in Samos, off the coast of Turkey in Anatolia. So that's in Asia Minor, Samos, off the coast of Asia Minor, and died in around 495 BC in Metapontum, in Magna Graecia. Now, why such a huge geographical distance between his birth and death places? We'll get to that. So he basically, what is assumed is that in Samos, where he was from, he got into some sort of political trouble, some political problems, and then he had to migrate, and so he migrated, across to the other side, Magna Graecia, which is Italy, so from like modern Turkey to modern Italy, think of that distance. So he traveled from Samos to Croton, and he set up a sort of school, Pythagorean school there, which actually was more of a religious sect. Right, so this was a Pythagorean sect or cult as we think of it, but that's not being very nice to them. And he was, in that sense, an emigrate to this new sort of place. And he died in Metapontum, we assume, because the Pythagoreans there, the Pythagorean sort of sect there, got into trouble with the local population, and they burnt down the school. And it is assumed that Pythagoras might have died out there. So we don't really know. Magna Graecia that I've mentioned was Italy, which was also a Greek colony since about 8th century BC. So you have, we looked at the map in one of our interactive sessions where we looked at how Greece, the Greeks lived sort of all around the Mediterranean. So, you could go all the way from, Thrace to Asia Minor, down to Egypt, and west to Italy. So that whole area was, was Greek inhabited. So he did not sort of go out of the Greek world. He was still in the Greek world, but he did move to a very different part from where he was born. So he is supposed to be part of what is called the Italian school. So far, when we were looking at the Milesians, they are thought as part of what is called the Ionian school. And now these things don't take them very, very seriously, because this is just a way of taxonomy that historians of philosophy do, in which they want to put sort of certain philosophers into the Ionian school, which is a more natural philosophy kind of a school, and then certain into the Italian school, which is more of a logic and mathematics sort of kind of a school. So you have these two sort of contrasting schools, but it's not really, you know, that clear-cut a division. So what was different about Pythagoras and Pythagoreans was what we would call the motive for philosophy, if we want to distinguish them from the Milesians that we have studied so far. So for the Milesians, we could say with Aristotle that the motive for philosophy was wonder or curiosity, or, you know, a desire to understand the world better, a desire to understand nature better, and to come with this understanding of nature to understand the arche of the world, you know, things like this. For Pythagoreans, actually philosophy is not a mere, let's say, understanding of the world. It's not just to sort of understand and to maybe sort of then develop some sort of scientific tools and methodologies. That's not the motive for philosophy. That's part of it, but that's a tool, or rather that's a method for getting to the real purpose of philosophy, which is to search for a way of life by which anybody, you know, who practices this philosophy can then find a place, find a relation to the cosmos that they inhabit, right? So it's a more sort of complex way of relating to the world. So it's not simply, okay, I'm this philosopher sage who looks at the world and tries to think, okay, how is this world a cosmos? Rather, I am the philosopher sage, I look at the world, I try to find why the world is a cosmos so that I too can become one with the cosmos, I too can bring my life in alignment with the cosmos, right? So the reason for understanding the cosmos is to become part of it, right? So in that sense, the Pythagoreans were not just a scientific and mathematical sort of group of people, followers. Rather, they were also a religious and political sort of group. So Pythagoras, if he existed, was as much a religious and political leader and teacher, we should say, as a philosopher, as a mathematician and scientist. And in that sense, he also, that's why I've been talking about this Pythagorean sect. He founded this organized sect, this organized society that practiced his teachings, right? That upheld his teachings in practice. And in that sense, as the founder of this sect, he is heroized, he is canonized, he is deified, you know, he's thought of as almost descended from the gods. And that's why we have this haze of legend over his memory. I mean, even then, you know, even with the early philosophers, there's a lot of, you know, legend involved when people talk about Pythagoras. And so often, a lot of things that were attributed to Pythagoras, including the Pythagorean theorem, by the way, might have not come from Pythagoras himself, but might have been attributed to him. It is possible it came from a Pythagorean, so in that sense, it is a Pythagorean theorem. So it might have come from one of the later Pythagoreans, but we don't know whether it came from Pythagoras himself, because we really don't know that much about him. And what we have about him, you know, the kind of things that we have heard about him, they don't really match up to sort of our modern ways of thinking about people, about history, about biography. So I'll read out this very, very interesting section, this testimonia, in which Heraclitus of Pontus says about Pythagoras that Pythagoras used to say about himself that he had once been born as Aethalides and was regarded as a son of Hermes, descended from the god indeed, right? He thought of as, you know, he was this, once he was born as Aethalides, Aethalides, and was regarded as a son of Hermes. Hermes, who was a father, told him that he could choose anything he wanted except immortality, because usually sons of gods get a choice of immortality, right? So Pythagoras, who was at that time the son of Hermes, was given a choice that he could have anything except immortality. And he asked to be able to retain, both alive and dead, the memory of things that had happened. So he was a very clever fellow, right? I mean, what other than immortality is to get immortality of the soul, right? The body is not immortal, right? So Aethalides would die, but the soul would remain, because if he retains a memory, that means that he has a continuous life, no matter what, right? So he therefore remembered everything during his lifetimes, and when dead, he still preserved the same memories, yeah? Lifetimes, notice. Later, he entered into Euphorbus and was wounded by Menelaus, right? So he was in the Battle of Troy, and he was a character there, and that means that he retained the memory of being this person and the person that he was before. Euphorbus used to say that he had formerly been born as Aethalides and had received the gift from Hermes, and used to tell of journeying of his soul and all its migrations, recount all the plants and creatures to which it had belonged, and describe everything he had experienced in Hades and the experiences undergone by the rest of the souls there, right? So he had been reborn, and he had been reborn as plants, which is interesting, and animals, right? He had gone to Hades, come back, right? And he had met other souls who did not have the same sort of chance. When Euphorbus died, his soul moved on to Hermotimus, who also wanted to prove the point. So he went to Branchidae, entered the sanctuary of Apollo, and pointed out the shield which Menelaus had dedicated there. When Hermotimus died, he became Pyrrhus, the fisherman from Delos, and again remembered everything, how he had formerly been Aethalides, then Euphorbus, then Hermotimus, and then Pyrrhus. And when Pyrrhus died, he became Pythagoras and remembered everything that has just been mentioned. Okay? So you can see, I mean, apart from this doctrine of transmigration of the soul, of reincarnation, which we will talk about in more detail, you can see how the legend of Pythagoras functions, you know, how there's a legend surrounding him. There's this, that he was, that is credited to him himself. I mean, we don't have any text by Pythagoras. So he was another in the line of philosophers who did not write anything. So we only have testimonia, the doxographical tradition. We do have fragments from other Pythagoreans, but not from Pythagoras himself. But we have these testimonia like this one, which, I mean, we cannot take seriously. I mean, I would say take it with a grain of salt, but just don't take it at all, because this is a pretty odd sort of idea. So the Pythagoreans generally, not just Pythagoras himself, but the Pythagoreans generally were philosophers, they were scientists, but they were also mystics, right? And their religion involved this theory of reincarnation, of metempsychosis, as it is called, transmigration of the soul. And when they talked of, physics, of mathematics, of cosmology, cosmogony, all these different things. So they did talk about a lot of mathematical and scientific and astronomical sort of things. They saw them as much as scientific discoveries as sort of mystical revelations, right? These were mystical. So let's say they discovered, the square root of 2, let's say, with the Pythagorean sort of, with the triangle. It's a mystical revelation about something, right? any sort of scientific discovery is at the same time a mystical revelation. And so in their minds, there was this, you could not distinguish between mathematical, astronomical, religious speculation. These are all sort of intertwined, and they are in some ways the same. So mathematics is just sort of one element of their mystical religious experience. And as I said, they were a religious sect, and they were a very interesting religious sect, in the sense that they had this vow of silence that people had to take when they entered the sect. So any applicant, any sort of person who applied for membership, let's say, to this Pythagorean sect, would be told that they'd have to go through this initiation period of silence. And I think it was something like 5 years of silence. I don't know, I'll check in my sources. So there were many years of silence, just sort of keep it vague. And in those many years of silence, presumably they would learn how to keep their mouth shut, which obviously did not work very well because we still have lots of testimonia about the Pythagoreans. But the one thing that they were, especially asked to keep silent about was these mathematical revelations, because these were supposed to be the highest form of truth that they have reached. So only, the ones initiated should have access to this. Not all was to be divulged to everybody. They might talk about some of the ethical practices, which we'll also talk about. And so we have a lot more mentions, and again, without that many explanations about, their way of life, their sort of practices in their way of life. But we don't have as much about their mathematics, unfortunately. We have some idea, but we don't have as much. And this is because the mathematical could not be separated from the religious. Amongst the Pythagoreans, it could not be separated. And so in contrast with the Milesians that we have looked at, when the Pythagoreans took up these philosophical researches, these sort of, they tried to understand the structure of the cosmos, they tried to understand mathematics, it was all sort of with this sort of avowed purpose of making it part of their religious and ethical practice, right? So all of the research that they did, it was not for its own sake. It was not science or philosophy or anything for its own sake, but or even for the sake of technological improvement or something. It was for the sake of religious practice, ethical practice, for the sake of the way of life. Of Pythagoras, what we know is that he was a polymath. In fact, we have this quote from Heraclitus, who is not talking very nicely about him. But Heraclitus, and we'll cover that when we discuss Heraclitus as well, he said, the learning of many things does not teach understanding. If it did, it would have taught Hesiod and Pythagoras, and again Xenophanes and Hecataeus, right? So he mentions Hesiod, Pythagoras, Xenophanes, Hecataeus. So Pythagoras is mentioned by name, and he is called, the word used there is polymathie, right? The study of many things. So this learning of many things, the study of many things. So he was considered to be very sort of, he had studied a lot of things, right? Another one, Pythagoras, son of Mnesarchus, practiced inquiry beyond all other men, and selecting these, made these his own. Wisdom and learning of many things, artful knavery. Again, not very nice to him, but again, and here, please note, you do have the traditional Greek way of introducing somebody, which is Pythagoras, son of Mnesarchus, not Pythagoras, the reincarnation of Pyrrhus, who was the reincarnation of blah, 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 till the son of Hermes. So that is, again, not the most common way of introducing somebody. So that's special about Pythagoras. Yeah. So before we go into details about, his different theories, in which we will cover his theory of transmigration of the soul and the place of soul, his idea of numbers and numbers being the basis of everything, music as well. So just to sort of finish this introductory section, we knew that he was a polymath. He was a man probably of prodigious learning, and with this sort of insatiable thirst for inquiry, much inquiry, as Heraclitus says. But we also know that his followers and the veneration of his followers had raised him up to this legendary status. He was like almost a god. It was a different form of immortality. And in fact, we will talk about this different form of immortality, because this is actually very different from the Homeric idea of immortality. But it's still immortality, right? So it's almost a god. The other thing that we should remember, and I'll bring it up again and again so you will not forget, is that there was this silence and secrecy around all their studies, all their practices. So this was very central to the Pythagorean way of life, and that they formed a society or a sect, or if you want to be not very nice to them, a religious cult, which followed a particular way of life, which had a number of superstitions, including things like one should not eat beans, or one should wash one's left foot first. They had some strange practices, and probably the practices brought them together in their like, why do you have rituals at all? Any sort of religious system. Half the time anybody outside of that religious sort of sect will not understand some of the practices. It's a way of joining the followers together. So they had all these strange practices and all these strange superstitious beliefs, and they were, not just then, but then and later for many, many centuries, acknowledged experts in all kinds of, scientific and mathematical sort of pursuits, from whether it was astronomy, cosmology, music, number theory, like all kinds of things. They thought about a lot of these things, and they discussed a lot of these things, and so people did think of them as being, polymaths. The Pythagoreans were thought of as being polymaths. And to end with this Pythagorean sect, so we have been talking about, the mathematical sort of descendants of Pythagoras into our times, even, in which even every single school child, at some point, would study about the hypotenuse and about the square of the hypotenuse, and about right angle triangles and the diagonals of squares. So we connect Pythagoras to mathematics, but also to religion, because what is thought of as, or what was called later, the pagan religion, was actually a form of Neo-Pythagoreanism. They were called the Neoplatonists, but then Plato was highly influenced by Pythagoras, we will see. And this religion that sort of cropped up afterwards, and especially in, sort of post, in AD, in post-Christ sort of like Roman world, and then later on all over. So this religion was very, very Neo-Pythagorean. And the Emperor Justinian did try to bring it to a violent end, but that did not really sort of end it entirely, in fact. And I was very surprised when I was reading George Eliot's Middlemarch, which was written in 19th century, with the mention of a Pythagorean cult that I think the doctor in there was part of. And I was just thinking that, 19th century, you still had Pythagorean cults there. So you have the idea of the Pythagorean sort of like practices that also continued. So not just, this one sort of theorem that we attribute to the Pythagoreans, the Pythagorean theorem, but also their religious and their sort of sect-like practices, which did continue on, and perhaps also in sects. It never became, you will not find Pythagorean religion per se, but it did sort of, continue on. And so you can see that there is a long sort of, what's it called? Descendants that you can see from the Pythagoreans, I can't find the right word, in the modern world as well. So in the next sections, we will talk about sort of all the other different sort of more philosophical aspects combined with, the religious mystical aspects of the Pythagoreans. Thank you.